The young and the restless spoilers. There was a time when Lily believed that darkness had finally loosened its grip on her life, that she could move forward from the betrayals, the heartbreaks, and the long shadows that Cain had cast over her soul. With Damian, everything felt different. There was clarity in their connection, a quiet strength that had pulled her away from the chaos of the past. Their love had not been born from desperation or obligation but from truth. A rare kind of honesty that made Lily feel seen, valued, safe. And yet, safety in Genoa City was always an illusion, especially for someone like her, whose past was tied so tightly to a man who never knew how to let go. Cain was a storm masquerading as stability. Even in his most tender moments, there was always an undercurrent of calculation. And now, Lily had learned what her heart always feared but her mind had tried to deny: Cain was planning to kill Damian. Not out of jealousy alone, but because in Cain's twisted view of love, anything or anyone that stood in the way of what he believed to be his was expendable. Lily had heard whispers, hints from people too afraid to speak directly but too disgusted by Cain's obsession to stay silent. A hushed conversation between Cain and someone from his past. A cryptic warning from Billy, who had seen darkness in Cain's eyes that reminded him of old wounds. At first, she dismissed it as paranoia. But then the pieces began to align: the threatening messages Damian received without a trace, the suspicious brake failure in his car weeks ago, the sense that someone was always watching them. And now, confirmation had arrived, not in words, but in the pit of her stomach and the raw terror she felt. Cain was capable of murder. He had convinced himself that if Damian were gone, Lily would return to him, forget every cruel word, every broken promise, every manipulative ploy. But Cain never understood love. Not really. He mistook possession for devotion and vengeance for justice. Even if Damian were to die, Lily would never go back to Cain. Not now. Not after realizing that the man she once trusted was the architect of her nightmares. And that was the tragedy, wasn't it? That Cain could not see that his obsession had only built walls, not bridges. That his violence ensured he would lose her forever. But Lily had moved beyond hatred. There was no room in her soul for bitterness anymore, only grief, for what she had lost, for what could never be repaired. Life was cruel in its timing, but she had learned to cherish the fragile moments, to honor them even in pain. She and Damian had planned their wedding down to the smallest detail. The scent of lilies would fill the air. Devon would walk her down the aisle. Faith, Sharon's daughter, had written a song to sing at their reception. There would be no grandeur, only truth. It was supposed to be a celebration of second chances, of building something beautiful on the ruins of heartbreak. They were just days away from becoming husband and wife. And then, everything unraveled in a flash of twisted metal and shattered glass. The accident happened just before dusk, on a winding road near the cliffs that overlooked the bay. Lily had been humming a melody when Damian reached over to squeeze her hand. They had been talking about their vows, about how surreal it felt to finally be on the cusp of forever. Then came the screech of tires, the shudder of the steering wheel, the sickening twist of the vehicle as it veered violently off course. There was no time to scream, no time to react. The car plunged into the rocks, a blur of motion and sound that ended in a bone-crushing impact against the cliffside. The windshield exploded. Metal bent like paper. Silence fell. And then darkness. Emergency responders arrived to find a scene out of a nightmare. The vehicle was barely recognizable, a crumpled ruin perched precariously near the edge of a drop that would have meant certain death. Both passengers were unconscious, bloodied, still breathing, but just barely. The paramedics worked fast, their voices tight with urgency. It was clear from the beginning that the outcome would not be hopeful for both. As the news reached the hospital, the whispers began. One of them would die. That was the stark reality. 2 hearts had entered that car. Only one might leave the hospital alive. Inside the trauma unit, doctors fought to stabilize them. Lily had a broken clavicle, fractured ribs, a punctured lung, and a severe concussion. Damian's injuries were worse: internal bleeding, a shattered pelvis, brain trauma. Monitors beeped. Nurses whispered. Family members gathered in tear-streaked silence. Devin held back tears as he called Nate, who flew in from Chicago to oversee Lily's care. Billy stood beside Amanda, his hands trembling. He had always feared this. That Kane's darkness would one day cross the line into unforgivable violence. And this time, it wasn't just emotional destruction. It was physical. It was real. And then came the sight that none of them had expected. Far away from the hospital, high above the wreckage site, standing just behind a line of trees near the cliff's edge, was Kane. Alone. Watching. Smiling. He had been there. Had he tampered with the brakes? Had he paid someone to orchestrate the crash? Or worse, had he simply waited, knowing the road, knowing the time, and trusted fate to do the rest? The smirk on his face said everything. This was not a coincidence. It was a calculated act. He hadn't pulled the trigger, but his hands were soaked in blood all the same. The tragedy was not a twist of fate, it was the result of an obsession left unchecked. And as Kane disappeared into the shadows, that smirk lingered in the air like the echo of a gunshot. Back at the hospital, the night passed in agonizing slowness. Damian's condition deteriorated. He slipped in and out of consciousness, unaware of the storm raging around him. Lily awoke briefly, unaware of where she was, asking only if Damian was safe. She drifted back into unconsciousness before anyone could answer. Doctors debated surgery. The risk was high. There was a chance Damian wouldn't survive the night. But he did. Barely. And when morning light seeped through the blinds, Lily opened her eyes fully for the first time since the accident. Her voice was hoarse, her chest aching. The first words she spoke were his name. Damian. But what came next would break her all over again. Nate entered the room gently. His expression betrayed the heaviness of what he carried. Damian had survived surgery but was in a coma. No guarantees. No promises. Just hope, fragile and uncertain. And as Lily sat in her hospital bed, connected to machines, her body broken, her heart held together by threads, she felt something awaken inside her. Not vengeance. Not rage. But purpose. Kane could not be allowed to destroy anything else she loved. He had gone too far. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about truth. Justice. Protection. If she survived this, and she would, then she would bring Kane down. Not with hatred, but with clarity. With strength. With everything she had left. And somewhere, far away, Kane lit a cigar and watched the morning news. The headline flashed across the screen: Tragic crash on Bay Road leaves power couple hospitalized, foul play suspected. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He had always believed that pain was the only language Lily truly understood. That loss would bind her to him, like it once had. But what he failed to see, what he never could understand, was that Lily's strength came not from needing others, but from surviving them. And this time, she would survive him too. Not just to live, but to finally be free. Let me know if you'd like to continue the story or explore what happens next, whether Damian wakes up, or how Lily takes action against Kane. The wreckage still steamed in the early morning air as investigators combed through the debris, their gloved hands carefully documenting every twisted remnant of metal, every broken shard of glass, every splash of blood that had seeped into the earth. The road that had once curved so gently along the bay now bore the scars of something far more violent, a tragedy that had shattered not only steel but lives. The forensic team took photographs, measured skid marks, mapped the angle of the fall, but what none of them could see was the true intent behind the chaos. The truth did not lie in the trajectory of the tires or the depth of the impact. It lingered in the silence of a man who stood just out of reach, a man whose smile had vanished now that reality was catching up with him. For Kane, this was not a clean victory. This was something else. Something twisted. He had waited his whole life to reclaim Lily, to win her back from every man who had dared stand between them. But now, as he watched her motionless body soaked in blood, her breath shallow and irregular, her skin pale as death, he felt something he could not name, panic, perhaps, or the unfamiliar weight of consequence. When the paramedics lifted Lily's body onto the stretcher, her arm dangled limply. Her head rolled to the side, revealing a gash above her temple that refused to stop bleeding. Damian was no better, his face nearly unrecognizable beneath the bruises and blood, his body limp, his pulse barely detectable. The paramedics shouted for more oxygen, more hands, more urgency. 2 ambulances were called. No one could risk losing time. And yet, Kane, uninvited, slipped into the chaos like a ghost. He followed Lily's stretcher. He ignored the officers calling after him. He didn't speak. He didn't explain why he was there. He simply sat at the back of the ambulance, gripping her hand like it could tether her to life. He whispered her name like a prayer, but it sounded more like a plea to himself, a desperate attempt to erase what he had set in motion. What if she died? That thought cracked through his confidence like ice splitting under weight. What if Lily never woke up again? He had not planned for that. He had told himself he was targeting Damian. That Lily was just collateral. That once Damian was out of the picture, Lily would see clearly, would come back to him, would forgive him. But he had forgotten that fate rarely follows scripts written in madness. He had not counted on the violence of the crash, on the unpredictability of nature, on the simple truth that death plays no favorites. And now here he was, sitting at Lily's bedside at Memorial Hospital, watching as machines breathed for her, watching as her chest rose and fell with artificial rhythm, as blood trickled from the corners of her mouth, as tubes snaked from her veins and monitors screamed every time her body wavered toward stillness. He wanted to believe he was saving her now. That his presence could reverse what had been done. But some stains cannot be washed out. Some hands, once soaked in blood, can never be clean again. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. Her skin was cold. Nurses moved around him silently, refusing to make eye contact. The detectives had already arrived. They had questions, but no answers. There were no witnesses. No tire tracks leading to the crash site. No evidence of brake failure, yet. But something felt wrong. One of the officers whispered to another, why was Kane at the scene so quickly? How had he found them? Was he following them? The questions floated in the air like smoke, unspoken but felt. Still, no one stopped him from staying by Lily's side. Not yet. They assumed his grief was real. And maybe, in some distorted way, it was. But grief born from guilt is not love. It's fear. And Kane was beginning to fear everything. There had been no update on Damian. The ICU was locked down. Specialists were flown in. But the whispers in the hallway were bleak. He had lost too much blood, his brain scans were erratic, and though he had survived surgery, no one could say what was left of him. If he died, the guilt would be unbearable. Or would it? Kane didn't know anymore. He had wanted Damian gone. He had imagined this, hadn't he? But not like this. Not with Lily lying there beside him, broken. Not with the possibility that he had taken from her something she could never replace. And now the thought returned, what if Lily never woke up? He spoke to her softly. He reminded her of memories, nights in Paris, the birth of their children, the time he held her when she cried over Neil. But her eyelids did not flutter. Her lips did not move. The machines kept beeping. And suddenly, Kane realized that he was not in control anymore. The script had torn itself apart. His plan, if he had even dared call it that, was unraveling. Damian might die. But if Lily did too, then it was not a victory. It was a void. And in that void, there would be no forgiveness. No reunion. No chance. Only exposure. Because someone would talk. Someone would remember. Someone always does. In another part of the hospital, Devon was pacing. He had just landed, his flight delayed by weather, his calls unanswered. When he arrived and saw the blood on the stretcher, the screams in the emergency bay, the sterile scent of death lurking in the air, he nearly collapsed. He had already lost too much in his life. And now, his sister was fighting for her life, and the man she loved was dangling between existence and oblivion. He demanded answers, but no one had any. The doctors could not promise anything. They only spoke of hours, not days. Lily's brain activity was stable but faint. Damian's was chaotic. If he survived, there might be nothing left of the man he was. Devon clenched his fists, his mind racing. And then he heard it, someone mention Kane's name. That Kane had been found at the scene. That he had inserted himself into Lily's care. And something inside Devon snapped. He marched to Lily's room, pushing past a nurse who tried to stop him. And there he found Kane, sitting beside her, talking like he belonged there, like he hadn't destroyed everything. Devon's voice was ice as he asked Kane to leave. But Kane stood, defiant. He said Lily needed him. That he was helping. That he still loved her. But Devon saw through the act. He had always seen through Kane. And now, as he looked at Lily's unconscious form, at the bruises on her neck, at the way Kane's hand lingered too long, he knew something was wrong. Very wrong. He didn't have proof yet. But he would find it. Because if Kane had done this, if he had even played the smallest part in this horror, then he would answer for it. Devon would make sure of it. No matter what it took. Because love is not possession. And justice, when it comes, does not knock quietly. Would you like me to continue with what happens if Damian dies, or if Lily wakes up and remembers something? The fallout can be even more dramatic. Let me know how you'd like the story to evolve.